All right, we are recording for chapter 16 of Fine Frontier. I forgot to mention the end of chapter 15 does have them deciding to go down to the planet, taking Cybok with them. So 16 starts with them going down there. But I also do want to say this. I know it's a little bit of a spoiler. I was right. It made sense. Excuse me. That, as I've mentioned before, and this is like all the way at the end of the chapter, but still, how I had mentioned before, when John said to Cybok, share your pain. And that's how we then get the backstory, additional backstory on Cybok, because he does share it with John, and potentially it was unintentional on his part, that because John used the phrase, essentially used the mantra, it caused Cybok to engage in the connection, the telepathic connection, that he may not have otherwise. But then I noticed that every single time after that moment, when Cybok did the same thing, he never used that phrase. It's not exactly, but it is pretty damn close what he uses here. Share it with me, because he is already referring to pain, so it is he's just using a pronoun there, but he does do that. So yes, I do take that as close enough that it was in fact at that moment when he shared with John, it did discomfort him. And that once his failure is realized, but he finds a new purpose for himself, that focuses him and it brings him back to using that original picture. So, yes, I was right. It's also one of those things that, obviously, that's what, at least to me, I see that as being obvious, is that that's what you would do, that you would have him be shaken by John accidentally, but shaken then. So he's deviated from it, but then he comes back and it's like, this is when he's focused and most powerful, most effective. If you need a modern equivalent or something similar to it today, Spider-Man No Way Home, how the spell that would erase memory of Peter Parker as Spider-Man, initially is this very small spell and all that, but then at the end, when it's like, no, just erase memory of Peter Parker entirely, but it's also, he's now saying with focused determination, the spell is much better formed, like it's clearer there, but it's also much, much larger. It's kind of like that, where now you've got that determination, uncertainty, shakiness before, now it's realized. Anyway, we do get some descriptions of the planet. Landscape was a glorious riot of shape and color, ranging from the pale pastels and low growth of a seascape to the intense, vibrant shades of jungle and forest. I do not recall it being shown that way in the movie. I just remember the actually very barren look, which when they land and then approach the area that Cybok knows that's where the being is going to be, what is described there, that makes sense for what we do see in the movie. But it seemed like in the movie all they did was that and like use special filters to get an otherworldly coloring to it. Not the but not necessarily the scene that was just described there. And there's other things that describe it as well in not necessarily similar terms, but you get a similar image. What is possibly the first sign of trouble, but aside from the shuttle actually being taken control of to land. But this is more so, there's something off here. Fascinating, Spock said, more to the captain than to his brother. This is after they've walked up and are basically at the center where the being will appear. The force seems to be emanating from a point several kilometers below the surface of this crater. The readings are... He frowned at the instrument as it emitted a single distressed beep and fell silent. Spock pressed several controls without success. Readings were off the scale, Captain. It appears the energy flux has damaged the internal mechanisms of the tricorder. He looked up, his expression puzzled. And Cybok is just like, well, of course it broke your tricorder, Spock. And that he need no more proof from seeing that, but I do wonder if that's not just because Spock was puzzled. It's like, if it's just off the charts, then it's like Spock, I think, would not be puzzled if that's what would damage it. But instead, I kind of read that as, with the puzzlement, in there that it was intentionally damaged. And Spock's like, wait a minute, why would that be the case? There can also be the question of, would a tricorder be able to measure God? Kind of suspect that various vast aspects of such a being would be beyond capabilities of tricorder. I did like later on when we get the description of, though I had to look up a word, of in the movie we see it like cycling through after it appears, cycling through different forms for them to see. And it does make clear in the book, by the way, that while Cybok does see a form that is Vulcanoid, that, resembles Vulcans with both masculine and feminine features, it says, Kirk does see a genial old man. So it is they are seeing their own version of him, which I think that's also the case in Marvel Comics for Galactus, which makes sense for Galactus because he also exists as like a kind of force of nature, so he doesn't necessarily have a physical form that would be fixed. His form would appear to being as whatever makes most sense for them to comprehend that force of nature as. Anyway, this is more intentional, though. Within the maelstrom of pure force, Eidolons were born. I had to look up Eidolons, Eidolons. And it's apparently just, like, a specter is one of the meanings for it. Which, yeah, that actually does make sense for what was shown in the movie. And seeing how it is coming out of this force that's just emanating there. Cybok recognized one of them instantly. Kosar, the ancient Vulcan god of war. Fierce and hawk-like of countenance. Muscular and strong, with long black hair tied with a green thong and allowed to stream down his naked back. He was dressed in a green mesh loincloth, and he carried a shield of green, dark green, the color of war. On Vulcan, nothing that lived was green save blood. Kosar's compelling form pulsed, whirled, and took on new shape, becoming that of his warrior consort, the god Arcana. And it goes through some others. He isn't looking at all of them, but I was kind of hoping that there would be something thrown in there that of Teray, well, which is a version of Ray or Rhea that John recognized as being a Romulan god of death. But this would be an ancient Romulan god of death would be a Vulcan god as well, because they were one species until, I think in Search for Spock it said, or Voyage Home, I think it was Search for Spock, it said that it was only about 1,000 years prior. So that the two had split. So yeah, it should also be that. I mean, it might be a different translation, but it still would have been interesting if he did catch a glimpse of his own mother there, or at least something that he recognizes as that same goddess that that her name comes from. Cybok is not as much a fool in this. Well, here, let me read it, and then it'll make sense. And how did you breach the barrier? It's using all caps for the being. For the most fleeting of seconds. Is that grammatically correct? The most fleeting of seconds. I mean, I guess, yeah, because even though it might be, fractions of a second, you still would refer to those with an S there, I guess. As a plural. Because the fleeting of seconds, it's like 2 seconds or more. Anyway. Fleeting of seconds, Cybok felt a tug of doubt. Why would the Almighty ask a question to which it knew the answer? Okay, technically, that happens a lot, but moving on. Not in this context, but in the joy of the moment, he pushed the doubt away. With the starship, it took me years to perfect the shield design so that the barrier could be crossed, but I persisted. I mean, technically, yes. God will ask questions that he knows the answers to, but it's more so to get you to answer them. I mean, there is that element here, but that's not what this is. And how did you breach the barrier? That's I need to know how you did this. Not I need to hear you say it. I need you to say it out loud. It's not like that. So, and I think there might be another moment as well. Hang on. Oh wait, no, there isn't, because we do get to Kirk pretty soon. And this starship, could it carry my wisdom back beyond the barrier? Yes, it could, yes. Sybok was utterly seduced by a glorious vision of his destiny. He alone had been chosen to reveal the one to the galaxy. He closed his eyes and heard the beguiling whisper of his mother's voice. Sheev, were the ancient Vulcan word for Messiah. I shall make use of it. Sybok laughed with joy. It will be your chariot. So, sin of pride, right here. That he's like, you think about how great he is going to be by being the one to bring this great being to the galaxy. And that's what his thought process is here, and he's giving into the temptation for the time being. But then we do get the whole, Kirk going, excuse me, and for the most part, the being tries to ignore him, but eventually, excuse me, Jim repeated, this time more insistent. The being, Jim refused to think of it as God, regarded Kirk with annoyance. Jim smiled his best conciliatory smile. Whatever it was enormously powerful, and he did not want to anger it. I just want to ask a question. What does God need with a starship? Instead of an answer, the being spoke again to Sybok. Bring the ship closer. You didn't answer my question, Jim said, a little irritably. If the being was unable to reach the ship from this distance, it couldn't be all that powerful. What does God want with a starship? I mean, if you are omnipotent, why don't you cross the barrier yourself? I do want to mention that what does God need with a starship? It does put God in italics there, which makes sense with Kirk, as is also in here, refused to think of it as God. But yeah, so that makes sense there. But it is also that should say with a little bit of sarcasm there. So I'm just checking. Yeah, so it is not happy with him because, I want proof before you commandeer my ship. I want proof that you are what you claim to be, and that's when the thing shoots him. Attacks him with the eye beams, which is also kind of funny because it's like that. You also didn't kill him. The phasers are more powerful than that. So this thing's not all that impressive now, is it? I mean, okay, it didn't want to actually kill him, but he's also just ignoring him anyway, so why would he spare him? But anyhow, at this, Sybok is definitely this isn't right. Jim looked over at Sybok. All joy had vanished from the Vulcan's face, replaced by shock and uncertainty. Yeah. And Sybok even asks, why have you done this to my friend? He doubts me. So yeah, it's... Oh, I almost forgot. Isn't that in here? Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, there it is. Okay. I complained in the previous chapter that despite it jumping from one location to another, it didn't do anything to indicate the jump. It was just the next paragraph. There was a point in this where it did do that. It did have the break there, and then it went right back to not doing that. It's like, be consistent. But they do end up jumping after Spock is shot, then leaping to the Enterprise. Where basically they have not only come to realize that Sybok was wrong, but also some of the brainwashing is slipping away as well. This is Talbot talking. To have come this far only to find... He squeezed his eyes shut. Damn, I need a drink. Which is something that Sybok's brainwashing had alleviated for him. When he opened his eyes again, he laid a firm hand on Caitlin's shoulder. Turn away, Miss Starr. Turn away. Don't watch. Caitlin kept her gaze fixed on the screen. How could this happen? How could he have been so wrong? It was all so beautiful. Hell always seems heavenly at first, doesn't it? Talbot's tone became ugly, bitter. I'm going below for a bloody drink. He actually doesn't, but still. So yeah, it is interesting how we do see them, and Cord is also Like, this is wrong. We were, not necessarily that we were lied to, but that Cybok was wrong. So yeah, and I do find that interesting how they are, Talbot at least is breaking away from what Cybok did to him, but it's also they are all recognizing that this was false. So yeah, the being has attacked Kirk and Spock at this point, not yet McCoy, but Cybok gets between McCoy and the being, which I did not expect that yawn. I was actually expecting a sneeze, so a yawn is easier. Anyway, so Cybok gets between the being and McCoy in order to partly blocking McCoy, saving McCoy, but also because it's just like he needs the answer to this. Stop. The god of Shakari would not do this. The being smiled at him. It was the most hideous expression Cybok had ever seen, full of maleficence, loathing, the deepest contempt. Shakari, a vision you created. The sound of its demonic laughter was unbearable. Cybok covered his ears with his hands, trying to blot it out. An eternity I've been imprisoned in this place. The ship. I must have the ship. Give me what I want, or I will kill you all. Teray's vision had been nothing more than a delusion, or perhaps a message from this creature. Utterly desolate, Cybok wished now only to join his mother's spirit, to seek the solace of total annihilation. So I do find an issue here that it does both present and then kind of suggests an answer to is, how does this being recognize Shakari as a term? I mean, fine, it can communicate with them, which might just be it is pushing its thoughts into their minds. Kind of like how it knows what each one would recognize most readily as being some form of a god there, some god to them. And so is showing that. Accepting that makes it fairly easy to then also accept that it's just pushing the thoughts in there. But how does he know what Shakari is? Because that's a proper noun that, doesn't necessarily have a matching thought for him, I guess is the way to put it. Yeah, I mean, just it being a proper noun, it's not necessarily, and not one derived from other words. How does he know that? But it could be, the whole may have been a message from the creature. So that basically he did create the myth of Shakari himself and push it out there. But then you have the problem of, well, wait, that means that this being does have influence beyond the barrier. So why is it not using that to other effects? I mean, just becomes a matter of, wait, I thought this thing wasn't supposed to be all that powerful, but apparently it is all that powerful. I mean, it's like you need a mythos here to explain how knowledge of it got out that was either accurate and then misinterpreted, or was always incorrect in order to serve him. So then we get Cybok being like, I must know the truth, I must see you as you really are, and it taking on Cybok's form, a reflection of him. No, Cybok whispered, it's not possible. Yet he realized in one bright and terrible instant of disillusionment that it was quite possible, in fact obvious. His willingness to deceive himself, his total conceit in believing himself to be the Sheev of legend, the creature, whatever it was, had instinctively sensed the depths of Cybok's vanity and had revealed it to him. So, good. I mean, this is what Cybok has needed for so long. Because it's also, it connects with how I had said at one point, he doesn't even have a motivation of his own. It's Teray's motivation. He's just trying to continue it. She impressed it on him, and he is trying to fulfill it. It's not been his own motivation. So now it's basically revealed to him that it's all false. That he is this prideful, he is this vain, that Teray's motivation allowed him to believe himself greater than he possibly was or ever could be. So it's like good that this is that self-discovery necessary for him. It also just occurred to me, I guess that it does kind of work. He might be a good example there. So I do not necessarily consider the concept of a villain as in being intrinsically evil. To me, I consider a villain one with machinations. So in theory, you could have a heroic villain. Somebody that does these machinations that may still have an ill design to them, shall we say. But they're not intrinsically evil. Cybok could be an example of that. Well, he is definitely a villain. He has all these machinations. He manipulates so many people. And yes, in a way that does violate them, making it ill. As I just said, ill designs. Because he had to violate their minds. But he himself was not evil. And what he was doing to him was heroic. He was wrong. And what he did do also was wrong. Like, not only was he wrong, he's not the hero, but what he did was wrong. But he is not specifically an evil character, but he is a villain by my definition. He is actually an example of that. Coming up with a heroic villain, that's harder to do. That would be more like, if somebody manipulated a bunch of people to get them into the right position, pair them so that they would be ready for whatever comes next. Yeah, that would more so be. I'm just trying to run through my mind, but it's kind of hard to just try to pull that one thing out of various places, various stories. I mean, I'm looking around to see if there's any near me that would make sense for that. You know what? That actually would be an example. That actually would be. Just remembered one. V in V for Vendetta, what he does to Evie with the whole the message that was a true message, how he presented that to her, that he was a villain to her, all the machinations there, and he did torture her, but it was for a heroic purpose, which was to free her of a lot of her fear, but incorrect principles and even values, you could argue. Is that, the whole tearing her down to build her back up kind of thing. But she was not a willing participant in that, because that is something that you see in militaries, and you at least in the U.S., you do volunteer. She did not in that, but it was still to a heroic purpose. So then, yeah, I can actually see being an example of a heroic villain, at least for that moment. And even then, technically as well, because some of the stuff that he had done in the shipping of the masks to everyone. No, V would actually be an example of a heroic villain. By my definition of villain, which the key thing there is the machinations involved. It's like the domino thing is perfect. It's like he set that up. That's a thing a villain does, though, is setting up all those dominoes and having them fall down. That's exactly what a villain does. But it is to a heroic purpose. But it is also technically, you could argue that what he did led to such things as the girl being shot, which is when the police inspector is talking about, what is going to happen, and you see that happening. Does that possibly also... But to a much lesser degree, it's not really on V what happened to what's his name, who did the Benny Hill skit with the glorious leader guy. But yeah, I can't even remember the actor's name. Hang on. Yep. I think I will be able to see it if I just pull it up this way. There. Is it Stephen Fry, maybe? Yes, Stephen Fry as Gordon Dietrich. That's right. He is not responsible. V is not responsible for what happens to him. but that is kind of like the only other death you really see there. But anyway, so yeah, I do like that we do have this here with Sybok and him recognizing his not only failure, but that it was always wrong. In other words, that he has discovered that yes, he was the bad guy, that he was the villain. He's not truly evil. I guess. I'm trying to remember, what was his name? Because that one was Josh. Who's the other one? This is actually really embarrassing. I should remember this one. Okay, Dave. I was thinking David, and it's like, no, it's not David. I know it's not David. But in my book, The Children Many Gifts, there is a character who he's not a good guy. He isn't really a villain. He also isn't technically evil. I mean, there's definitely two characters who are more so actually evil. Dave is more misguided, as is ultimately shown. It will be interesting whenever I do go through and do the videos on that, because I will... early 40s, I will explain a lot about him. And about what... it might happen earlier, but it would be the least spoilerish, and when I get to the 40s, to explain what Dave always was always meant to be, as far as how's he a good guy, how's he a bad guy, and all that. So yeah, anyway, getting back to this story. So now he realizes what's going on, and Sybok, he's kind of broken, but at the same time, it's also good for him. And he's basically, he knows what he's going to do now. He says to Spock, this is my doing, my arrogance, my vanity, save yourselves. Spock doesn't want him to sacrifice himself, but forgive me, Thyla, which is the word that was introduced back, I think, in the motion picture novelization. They were talking about how lover and how, this is an inside joke, and it's like, Ronberry, you're weird, stop doing that. But also for brother. But with the fraternal love aspect to there. So Sybok does have a brotherly love for Spock. Spock also does return it, not in the same way, but does return it. But it's also Thyla is the word to use for the relationship between Spock and Kirk, that they do love each other as brothers. Sybok said, he raised his hand and saluted his brother in a gesture he had not made in over 30 years. Live long and prosper. And I rather like that. Because that is... well, okay. One aspect to it I don't like, which would be if we interpret that as he has abandoned everything that he believes, or has been believing up to this point, and is going back to the modern logic. I don't want him doing that, but it still is if we treat it as more just a Vulcan salute, that he doesn't necessarily have to agree with the Vulcan logic, the Vulcan teachings of Sirach. Doesn't necessarily have to go with that. But it's still to be like, I am a Vulcan kind of thing. That in that context, I like it. If we see it as that, I think it's really good, because it is showing him humbling himself as well to being a Vulcan, not the special one, not the Messiah for Vulcan, but a Vulcan. So yeah, and to share that with Spock, yeah, I really do like that. I really do appreciate it. And we get the whole, I couldn't help but notice your pain. Pain? Ripple of confusion passed over Being's parody of Sybok's features. It runs deep. Sybok said, feeling an odd stirring of compassion. His words were true. As he probed the outer reaches of the creature's mind, he sensed a loneliness beyond all light, beyond all comprehension. Share it with me. And so we do have, not quite the share your pain, but still shared with me is, I'm taking it as close enough. And we did have, where is it? Okay. Yeah, a little bit before this. Then Sabak turned away from his brother. He faced the being and drew in a deep breath, summoning all of his powers, then looked at his evil, distorted image without hope, without joy, without fear. So I do appreciate this. And there's even some in here that... I mean, it is funny how it's like... yeah. Sabak had no one, and life was no longer important to him, but Spock had his friends. So it's like, well, if anyone's going to die here, it should be me, because it'll impact the fewest people. But then it's also, but when he remembered Spock, his brothers, and those remaining on the Enterprise, Dar, Talbot, Cord, Sulu, John, and all the others, it's like, you just listed off various people that do matter to you, and you potentially do matter too. I mean, it's like, even though, yeah, you did mess with them and all that, it still is. I could see Talbot being like, you still helped me. So, yeah, we can still be friends, but you ever touch my mind like that again, I'm going to kill you, kind of thing. I mean, but yeah, it's just, it is, and also John is totally connected to him, so it's like, no, Cybok, you do still have, you're not alone, you do still have people, you're not, as you're suggesting there, it's like Spock has these people, but I don't know, you do have them. It's more what you don't have is plot armor. So, and there's also, see, what would be better would be Cybok more so recognizing, I caused this. I need to be the one to take responsibility for it. That all those sins I've committed them. I acknowledge that. I admit that I was wrong. This might not be atonement. This might not be penance, but it is necessary. That would have been better. Something like that. With just a, yep, gotta fix this. Or at least do what I can to fix it. That I think would have been better. Alright, I'm just trying to decide. I'm gonna stop here. I'm just trying to decide, do I want to try to do another one? Yeah, I think I will. Okay. I'm going to try to do one more video after this, because that will be chapter 17. There's still chapters 18, the epilogue, and the Mountains of Gaul. We'll find out what that is later. Well, for me, I'll find out tomorrow. For you, in 4 days or so. See you then.